So this is part 2 of my Hyprland and Waybar tutorial series. Today what we're going to do is take a look at the rest of the default Hyprland configuration file. Now this isn't going to be all-inclusive because there are going to be some parts of the configuration file that we're going to talk about more in depth in future videos in this series, and there'll be some things that aren't in the configuration file that we'll also cover in future videos. Things like using i3 style tabs is something that I'm going to cover in a future video. So today we're just going to take a run through of the default configuration file so you guys can have some of an idea of what Hyprland can do. So let's actually go back to our VM where we left off last time. And again, we're using CacheOS, and we've done some customization here in terms of starting things. So we've started a Waybar. I've made it so that my monitor starts up in 1080p all the time. So those are the things that we've changed. So if we go into our configuration file, which is at .config hyper, and I will try to zoom in just a little bit. There we go. Now if we do an ls here, we'll see that we have some files. So the monitor's configuration file is just the monitors line. I've sourced that into the main Hyprland configuration file, and that's what I'm using. So if we go into the Hyprland configuration file, we're going to see that there's a lot of stuff here that we can get rid of. So we're going to actually do some things, and that way you can kind of see as I go along how I can customize Hyprland. So the monitors, as you can see, I've just sourced that configuration file, and that just tells Hyprland what I want my monitors configured as. We set that up in the previous video, so if you haven't watched that yet, go back and check that out. And these are the variables for some of the applications that we're going to use. So you can do this however you want with whatever applications you want, and it basically allows you to easily change things later on. You don't have to use the variable system like we've done here. You can just put that in the bind section later on when we create a bind for that specific program. But say for whatever reason you're a terminal emulator hopper, if that's such a thing. You switch back and forth between terminal emulators a lot. It's easier if it's set as a variable, so you can just switch back and forth very easily without having to scroll all the way down to the actual key bindings. So here we have it set as Kitty, we have the file manager set as Dolphin, and we have the menu set for Rofi. So if I wanted to create a new one, say for example for GIMP, I could do GIMP and then do something like, GIMP. I mean, that's kind of a silly variable to have, but say for example for whatever reason your distribution doesn't call it GIMP. They call it the GNU Image Manipulation Program or whatever. I probably misspelled something there. But let's just say, I did for sure misspell something there. Come on, Matt. Stupid dyslexia. But anyways, the point is, like, let's say we needed to do that. You could do that. Or say, for example, you've downloaded the Flatpak. So you do, Flatpak run org dot whatever dot GIMP. I don't remember what the actual thing is, but that's something that you could do. That way you don't have to type that whole thing out down there in the binds. You could just use the word GIMP. And you can do that for whatever you want. You can set whatever variables you want and then call them later on. Part of the reason why this is so cool is that you can call these variables later on. Say, for example, you wanted to set your colors this way. You could set your colors. So say, for example, you could do $color1 equals, and then just a pound. So say you wanted it white. You could do that. And then you could call color1 wherever you wanted later on. Now, we're not going to deal with colors or anything like that in this video here yet, but you can see how that could be very useful. So the next section that is in the default configuration file is the Autostart file, or the Autostart section. We've already talked about this a little bit earlier on, but when we set the Waybar to auto start, but basically anything that you want to auto start you would put here. So you'd use exec-1 equals whatever you want, and it gives you some examples on how you could do this. If you wanted to put these all in one line, you could do that. For me personally, what I do is I do exec-once equals and then /autostart.sh, and then I create an auto start script. So I would basically go to this file. So let's save this, and actually let's make that. So if I do touch, if I just vim into autostart.sh, and then I do my bang !bin/bash, something like that. Now I know that's not what you're supposed to use for the shebang, but that's fine. And then I could just exec things here. So I could do Waybar, and here Every line you'll want to end with an ampersand, and then you want to say, for example, start Nextcloud. You could do that, and so on and so forth. That way you can have all of your AutoStart stuff in one script, and that means if you need to, for whatever reason, start that script, you can just do that. Now, what you'd obviously need to do chmod, if I can spell, which I can't, plus x autostart.sh, and so on and so forth. You could just do it that way, and it would be pretty easy. So let's go back into our Hyprland. I'm actually going to delete this part because I don't need it right now, and there's nothing in there that I'm actually using, so we'll just leave that out. But if you wanted to do it all from here, or if you wanted to do it from a separate file, that's how you would do it. The next part is the environment variables. Now, we're going to cover this way more in depth in another video, simply because this can be a super important area, specifically for the stupid cursor. So, for example, in a lot of situations, when you first start up Hyprland, you're not going to have this awesome cursor that I have, and it's not really all that awesome. All it is a regular cursor. But for whatever reason, in some older versions, and maybe even in the current version, I'm not sure, the Hyprland developers have chosen to use the Hyprland logo as the default cursor. This is stupid. I don't know why they do it, but they've done it. Now, maybe they've changed that since now that when you guys are watching this, I don't know, but it used to be that case. The way that you set your cursor is twofold. One of them is going to be by making sure that hypercursor is running. So you'd need to put that in your AutoStart file, and then you'd also set a couple environment variables similar to what you'd see here. So you'd have the hypercursor size, you'd have hypercursor theme, and so much forth. Now, I will cover hypercursor much more in depth, but if you're itching to get rid of that stupid cursor and you want to do some research on your own, search for hypercursor and how to use it. That's what's going to get you there. And again, somewhere down the line in this series, I'll cover that in more depth, but you do that here in the environment variable section after you've started hypercursor. So there's that. So the next section here is the permissions. There's a good chance that you're never going to use this section at all. I know I've never used this, but if you need to set permissions for specific applications to interact with Hyprland, you can do that here. There are some things like HyperPM that you'll actually need to use this section for. Personally, like I said, I've never had to use it, but it's here in case you need it and you're having some problems with something interacting with Wayland. Now, like I said, that can get super complicated, so we may cover this in another video. If you're interested in hearing more about the permissions, you can leave a comment down below and we'll put that in the list of things to do. So now we're going to get into the fun stuff. So this here is the look and feel section of Hyprland. The first part is the general section. This is going to cover things like the gaps, the border size, the border colors, the ability to resize your windows or clients with the mouse, the ability to allow tearing in case you're using a game that requires some tearing, and the layout that it's going to use. So let's break this down just a little bit. So let's just say we want to change the gaps. So the gaps on the outer right now are set to 20. Let's say change these things to 50. And we hit right, hit enter. You can see automatically I now have really super large gaps. I don't know why you'd want gaps like that. Let's change these. Let's change this here to 10. And we'll write that. And then if we open up another terminal, like so, you can actually see that the gaps there have changed. We can actually change this. You can actually see them actually change. We'll write this again. You can see the gaps there in the center got bigger. So we're going to revert those to where they were before. We can also change the border size to, like, say 10, and we'll get super sized borders. Why, again, you'd want that, I don't know. We'll go back to 2. Now, the border colors are a little bit different. So the way that Hyprland does this with colors is with the RGBA nomenclature, or whatever they want to call it. So we'll just use RGBA, and then you're going to want the code of the color that you want. So you can look this up online somewhere, or if you happen to know what color scheme you're going to use. The first 6 digits of this are your color code. The last 2 are the transparency or opacity. Not sure which one of those words really apply, but basically it allows you to determine how transparent this particular border actually is. So you can you see through it? So that goes from AA to ZZ, I believe, and AA is going to be one level of opacity, transparency, one level of transparency. ZZ or whatever is going to be the opposite end of transparency. You can also choose 2 different colors. So as you can kind of see here, there are 2 different colors in the border. So I have like kind of a darker green down here and kind of blue down here. And those things in a traditional setup would actually be animated. So you can actually see that animation if you want. The 45 degrees part here of this setting tells you how those colors or that gradient is split. So it's kind of split down the center or whatever. So that's 45 degrees. You can do whatever degree you want and it would change it. So let's just say that we wanted to change this to 90 degrees. Like so. We'll save that, and you can actually kind of see a little bit that the colors have changed positions just a little bit. So you can do that. I believe it's from 0 to 180 degrees, and after that it just kind of repeats itself. So there's that. The next thing, we'll skip these 2 things because they're kind of self-explanatory, but there's 2 layouts that Hyprland gives you: dwindle and master. So by default it uses dwindle. That means if we open up another terminal, we can actually kind of see this is what the dwindle layout actually looks like. But if we go down here and change this to master, like so, and write it, you'll actually see this is the more traditional master stack layout that we're used to. So we'll close some of these things here and get rid of them. You can do a little bit of customizing on the layouts themselves by scrolling down here just a little bit. We'll come back past this, past the animations. You'll actually see dwindle and master have their own sections, so you can actually kind of change how those layouts function, whether or not, you know, where a new client spawns is an option. You can also choose how the dwindle layout is laid out and all sorts of stuff like that. There are more options for each of these. You just have to go to the documentation to find those options. All right, so the next 2 sections are decoration and animations. These are pretty self-explanatory as well. You have the ability to round the corners of your windows right here. You can change the regular opacity for focused and unfocused windows. This is actually fairly new because you used to have to do this by window rules. So that's really cool. I actually just noticed this. I might add these to my configuration file if I needed to, but we'll see about that later on. You can add a shadow to your windows as well. If you wanted to do some fancy erasing, you can do that. You can also disable that if you don't want that. You can also add blur. So I'm not going to be able to actually show you this because I'm on a VM and I don't have the proper things set up in order to do that, but you can actually, let's try this. Let's change this to 0.8. So change this to 0 and change this to 0.8 and then change this to, and we'll just leave that here. We'll write that. And actually you can kind of see the blur doesn't actually work, but the transparency did. But you can get blur if you're running on hardware. So you can change the vibrancy of the blur. There's more information at the link here that they give you. So if you wanted to find out what that vibrancy number actually means, you can go figure that out. I usually just leave it as the default because I've never actually been able, even on hardware, I've never been able to actually see a difference between those things. But maybe my eyes are just stupid. The next section is animations. And this one here, I'm not going to talk much about it because we're going to do a video on just animations later on in the series. But basically what this tells you is when you want to open up another thing, you can actually see there's kind of an animation there. It's kind of choppy because of being in a VM. But if we open up another one here, it kind of animates. These animations are controlled in this section here. So you can choose how that animation is done. So there's things like default, ease out, and ease in, linear, almost linear, quick, a whole bunch of different things that you can actually set. All of this stuff is covered in the documentation, but again, we're going to do an entire video on just animations for Hyprland because it allows you to do so much, and there's so many different things that you kind of need to know in order to do this, because this looks super confusing. It's not that bad. It's basically just telling you what you want it to apply to, and then it gives you some defaults for how fast and how powerful those animations are, and then the animation name itself. That's basically how this is laid out. So there's that. The next section is all about window rules. By default, there are no window rules in Hyprland set up for you. You kind of have to do that stuff yourself. So let's say you wanted to make GIMP float for whatever reason. You could do window rule and then equals, and then what you want it to do. So in this case, we want it to float, and then comma. We're going to want it to set it to the class of GIMP. So class, and then colon, and then parentheses, GIMP, and then close the parentheses, and that should, in theory, make GIMP float. Now, I don't actually have this typed out right. I actually need to make sure this says window rule instead of just window. So if I save this now, that error should go away. And now if I were to open GIMP, if I had GIMP installed, which I don't actually, it would float in the center of the screen. That's how you set a window rule. You can do a whole bunch of other things with rules too. Set the border size, set how rounded the corners are, set where the app spawns. So if you want to set it to workspace 3, you could do that from here. It actually kind of shows you how to do that with some of their examples here. So you can do a whole bunch of stuff with window rules, and you guys are probably getting sick of me here saying this, but I'll cover window rules more in depth in a future video in this series. So, but this gives you at least somewhat of an idea of how those things work. So I'm going to actually delete that. We've talked about dwindle and master. The miscellaneous thing allows you to set the wallpaper to something different. You can also disable the Hyprland logo if you don't want to use that particular background. So these things, you probably just leave those there, but if you want to set your own wallpaper and use something different, you can do that from there. The next section allows you to set your keyboard layout. Now you're thinking, well, why would you want to set your keyboard layout in Hyprland? You probably do that with your distro, right? Well, you need to tell Hyprland what keyboard layout you're actually using in order to have it know what key map to use. So in our case, we're using the US one. If you're using something like the Azurity or Dvorak or something like that, you'd want to tell them that so that it would know what key map to actually use, because down in the sections coming up when we talk about bindings, which I believe is the last section of this, it is going to be dependent on knowing what key map you have actually installed and active. So there's that. You can do a lot of things here as well. One of the important things is actually the follow mouse. That just means that when you switch to a new workspace, the pointer actually goes along with it. You can also change how your touchpad works if you need to use natural scroll, or you don't want to use natural scroll, however you're used to it. Hyprland does have the ability to use gestures. I've never used these things ever, but if you have a trackpad on your laptop and you want to be able to swipe between workspaces, you could change this to true, and it would allow you to do that. You can also set some settings for your mouse here in the device section. I believe it also functions for other devices as well, but I'm not sure. I've never actually used that section either. So it allows you to set some things that you'd normally have to have a third-party application to actually accomplish. So the last section of the default configuration file is all about bindings. So as we did earlier, we're setting a variable to super. So if you wanted to change this to alt, you could do that. If you wanted to change it to control for whatever reason, you could do that. So this is where you set your mod key. Below that, you're going to use that variable over and over and over again. For me personally, I would just use the word super if I were to set this up from scratch, simply because super is 5 letters, main mod is 7 letters, right? Plus a dollar sign, so it's 8 characters. That's way more typing than 5 letters. But if you, for whatever reason, and I don't know why you would do this, but say, for example, you decide you want to switch to a different mod key, it'd be much easier to switch by only changing that one line than having to go through and change every line. Now, if you're using Vim, obviously you can just use the Vim magic to change those things, but this is the reason why they've done that. If you wanted to change this to something different, they wanted to make sure that if someone else uses Alt, they didn't want to have to make you go down here and change each one of these lines. So that's the reason why they've done this. For me personally, like I said, I always use super, so if I were to set this up from scratch, I just use the word super because it's a few characters less. So basically how a binding works. Now we're again, sounds like a broken record, but I'm going to go more in depth in bindings in another video. But for a very brief thing, and we've covered a little bit about this in the previous video, you use the modifier key that you want. So say, for example, main mod or alt or control or shift or any combination thereof, the actuator key. So in this case, for example, for terminal, we're going to change this to say return. Now when I hit super enter, I'll get a new terminal. So I'm going to go ahead and quit that, which is by default is Control C, and then I'm going to go down to this next one actually and just change this to Q, because I want Q to be my kill switch. So That's how you do it. You put the key that you want to use as the actuation, and then you have the action. So for example, in this one, we're using exec and then the terminal, which we set that variable up top. And this one here is a dispatcher called kill active, which means that whatever window is focused, it will kill that if this key binding is pressed. Exits out the thing. So I'm going to change this to X, and I'm going to change this one to shift, like so, and then return, like so. And I'm going to save these things. And if I can stop pressing the shift key. So now if I wanted to say quit this, I could do mod, or let's say I wanted to open up my file manager. So I do mod shift enter, and I should get dolphin, which I do. If I want to quit that, I do super Q and it goes away. So those are things that I changed. Again, your mod key along with any combination of other mod keys, so shift, alt, control, whatever, and then the actuator key, which is going to be return, and then any of the alphabet or whatever you want to use, and then the action. If it's a application or a script that you want to use, you're going to use the word exec and then the thing with a comma separating them. If it's a dispatcher, which these things here are called dispatchers, these are actions that Hyprland itself takes. They're basically like little flags for doing things within the window manager. So kill active, exit, toggle floating, toggle to a different layout, move between different clients or different windows. Those things are all done with this dispatchers like that. So that's how those key bindings are set up. So that is the default configuration file. A very, very, very brief thing. So coming up next in the series, we're going to start talking about some of these things more in depth. We'll probably do 2 at a time or so because some of them won't necessitate, whole videos. But I do want to go more in depth in things that aren't included in the file. And more of the things you can do, things like animations, things like setting key chords within Hyprland. That's something that you can do. So all those things are going to be covered in this series. This is going to be quite the series. We're also going to eventually get into the Waybar and make sure that Waybar is themed and not looking like it is right now. So if you're interested in this series, make sure you subscribe because the next one will come out here within the next couple weeks, so you don't want to miss it. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions, you can leave those in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. You can follow me on Mastodon. That link will be in the video description. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/thelinuxcast. There you'll find a weekly exclusive podcast that I put out for all my supporters. Basically, it's just me sitting in front of this microphone for about 15 minutes or so, yapping at you guys on a random topic. Sometimes it's Linux, sometimes it's not. So if that's something that interests you, patreon.com/linuxcast. You can also head on over to the store, which is available at shop.thelinuxcast.org. There you'll find hats, t-shirts, all sorts of stuff. Basically, any merchandise you can understand is available at shop.thelinuxcast.org. All the proceeds for that go directly towards helping me make more Linux content for you guys. So thank you so very much for checking that out. Thanks everybody who does support me on Patreon and YouTube. You guys are all absolutely amazing. Without you, the channel just would not be anywhere near where it is right now. So thank you so very, 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 very much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. Just thank you so very much. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.